Okay, May 17th, 1954. So 1954, Supreme Court hands down its decision in the Brown versus the Board of Education. This had to do with the Board of Education in Topeka, Kansas. So this basically said that segregation in schools was unconstitutional and that the states were required to then segregate or desegregate their schools. So if you go back to 1896, the Supreme Court had ruled in Plessy versus Ferguson that in the case of rail trains, as long as equal accommodations were provided, you could separate the races. It was the whole separate but equal concept. And so this was carried into restaurants, restrooms, drinking fountains, schools, all the way through that early 20th century. So it wasn't until 1954 that the Supreme Court came back and said that in education, separate but equal does not apply. That separate is not equal, essentially. And this specifically dealt with a young woman, Linda Brown, who wanted to attend a school that was far superior to her school and much closer. It was miles closer to her house, but it was a white school versus her school was an African American school. So that is where the case came from. So the case was picked up by the NAACP, and Thurgood Marshall was the attorney that argued her case in front of the Supreme Court. Again, ultimately overturning the ruling and forcing schools to desegregate. Now, President Eisenhower at the time did not endorse the ruling by the Supreme Court. He also never came out and said that segregation was morally wrong. However, he recognized that the ruling could cause racial tensions, racial riots, violence, these kinds of things. So he came down with a full force of the federal government to support the ruling of the Supreme Court and basically saying the Supreme Court has spoken, right? So now we have to enforce the laws. And in fact, in 1957, he sent the National Guard to escort these 9 kids into school in Little Rock, Arkansas, the Little Rock 9. And so that's why for today. 1954, Supreme Court rules in Brown versus the Board of Education, and President Eisenhower takes that up and makes sure that it is enforced while he is president. So that's why for today. I will see you tomorrow.